So if you're around my age, you probably grew up in one of these Chrysler minivans, this particular one being an '88 Plymouth Voyager. And, back when I was growing up, these minivans were all over the place. In fact, they're still around quite a bit today, even though SUVs seem to have eclipsed them. But what's interesting is this. Um, Vans like this Plymouth Voyager and Grand Voyager, while very spacious, are actually not all too big by today's standards. And what I mean by that is this, because if you give it 30 years, here's the 2018 Honda Odyssey, and it's a behemoth. Um, in fact, over in Japan, they do have the Odyssey available for sale. It's not something specifically made for the domestic U.S. market, unlike some other vehicles, which I think the Honda Pilot, for instance, might be a U.S. only model. But over in Japan, this particular van would be considered large. Whereas over here in the States, if you want large, you're looking at something like a Mercedes Sprinter or a Ford Transit. And it got me thinking, how small can you get? Well, as it turns out, and this is one of the things that I love about Japan, is pretty darn small, which makes sense. I mean, you're on an island with very, very narrow streets, very low speed limits compared to the rest of the world. So let's check this out. Before we do, though, I do want to make a note that the Japanese did try selling a smaller, compact sort of minivan, what they consider a compact MPV, multi-purpose vehicle, here in the States, and it sold for a little while. This is the Mazda 5, and it actually did pretty well. I remember seeing quite a few of these on the road, and I thought they were pretty neat. But that's not small. That's not small when compared to what I'm about to show you. This thing is a mini MPV, or as I personally like to call them, the micro van. When I say micro, I mean it. This thing could probably be described as a smart car and a half in terms of overall length. And inside, it's very spacious. In fact, if you want to see just how spacious this kind of vehicle is, I would recommend paying a visit to Driver's High channel. He uploads videos, particularly of Japanese domestic vehicles, particularly of these little K cars or micro, like I call them, micro vans. And I've seen enough of them to where I can tell you that it's very spacious inside, but there is a bit of a caveat. So let's take a look here. So you can see there's plenty of room overall. You got plenty of passenger room, and these sliding doors, I just love them. But the only downside, and I must have clicked on, oh, it's up here, sorry. The only downside to a vehicle like this is the cargo capacity. The cargo capacity with the rear seats up, by American standards, is 0. So if you're going to go to Japan, and if you search YouTube, there are a lot of people who from the Western world who have moved to Japan and can tell you what it's like over there. I personally am not one of them. I would like to visit someday. But they do have a very limited amount of English-speaking car rental agencies. Here's a tip. Don't under any circumstances rent one of these unless it's yourself or somebody else. Like just 2 people tops. Any more and you're going to need something bigger. Because this thing is just teeny weeny itsy bitsy. How would it do on American streets? It wouldn't. And I'm going to show you why here. If we take a look at the speed limits here, this is for Japanese domestic. Let me activate my screen magnifier here. So the typical speed limit in Japan is around 80 to 100 kilometers an hour, so that's barely 60 on expressways. Whereas here in America, we got 75 and even 80. These little cars can't even do 80 unless you're about ready to like make the little engine scream for mercy. Because those things, it's a tiny little 3-cylinder motor with not even 100 horsepower, which makes sense over in Japan because, again, narrow streets, you got congested traffic like crazy. 40 kilometers an hour in urban areas, which, hey, Google, what is 40 kilometers per hour in miles per hour?
40 kilometers per hour equals 24.855 miles per hour.
So 25 miles an hour in urban areas. So, you know, very slow compared to the rest of the world, or at least here in the States. I don't know necessarily about the rest of the world, so excuse me. I do not mean to misquote or offend. But you get the idea. The speed limits over there are considerably lower than what we have over here in the States, especially. So, how well would these things do? They wouldn't. You could probably get them on the city streets, but not on the highway. But they wouldn't pass regulation anyway. The crash test results by American standards would be fail probably on all sides. By American law, you can import one of these little cars if it's 25 years or older. There's actually a fair market for these things, actually, believe it or not, which is cool because I like them. I think they're neat. That said, you could use them as a city runabout, but if you're going to get it on the freeway, ew. Like Doug DeMoro showed a couple of videos of his Nissan Escargot, which is a vehicle about the same size as the Suzuki Spacia or what I'm about to show you in a moment. It's a little cargo van, but the thing can barely do 60. It's practically screaming at 60 because, again, it's not really meant to do those speeds. In fact, if you get it above 60 miles an hour, for those of you who remember the classic Nissan ding-dong door chime, that'll go off if you're even a hair above 60. It kind of reminds me of my paratransit buses. If the drivers go above 60, which obviously you have to sometimes to keep up with traffic, there is a woman who gets on there and literally says, "Over speed limit," which is, I mean, these little cars, unfortunately, I love them, but they definitely would not make it here in the States. Not in their present form, at any rate. Oh, one other thing that I wanted to point out before we get to that one, the Honda NBox. Take a look at the styling here. This is a 2018 model, and I don't know about you, but this kind of looks 90s to me. So, this is my favorite out of all of these, is the Honda NBox. First of all, I love the name, NBox. Makes me wonder, what does N in NBox stand for? Excuse me. Any ideas? So, this is a really, really neat little car. Unfortunately, like I said, it wouldn't make it here in the States, not in its present form. But I do wonder, given the relative success of the Mazda 5, whether or not it might be time to bring something like this, and the keyword being like this, over to the States. And what I'm thinking is, take the overall design and enlarge it so that it would be usable on American roads, and see what happens. I mean, we had a fair amount of success with things like the Nissan Cube and the Scion XB. Local cab companies around here are still using the XBs as taxis. They're great little cars for that. The Kia Soul is still selling, and selling really well. And I think that it'd be interesting to see how something like the NBox or the Spacia, you wouldn't have the Spacia here in the States, because unfortunately Suzuki's automotive division had to pull out several years ago. But in terms of like if Honda wanted to bring the NBox over here, maybe do a bit of a redesign, blow it up just a tiny bit to make it fit on American roads more easily. I just love the overall boxy design. Now, there is a caveat in case I didn't already address it. Unfortunately, with a vehicle this size, by American standards, there is no luggage. Oh wait, I already did. I did address the luggage space. I'm sorry, it's late. But yeah, so that's one of the problems. No crumple zones to speak of by American standards. But again, we look at the lower speed limits in Japan, the traffic congestion in Japan, especially in the Tokyo area. It's just crazy. If you search like driving in Japan, you will see now out in the country it's not so bad, but get into the city and it's ugh. That doesn't stop me, incidentally, from wanting to visit. I'd love to visit Japan at some point, tour the temples, and ride around in these tiny little cars. I just think it'd be neat. The NBox in particular is my favorite, though, for a very, very good reason. First of all, it's cheap. By American standards, and I ran the conversion, I believe you can have this for around $13,000. And that's I don't know how well equipped that is, but again, if you go to Driver's High channel, he'll show you. You look around and you can see some of these cars are pretty nicely equipped. Overall, all things considered. But the reason that I like the NBox is that starting in April, they are actually going to produce a model with a rear fold-out wheelchair ramp. Now, could this thing fit an American wheelchair? Absolutely not. But I happen to know two people in wheelchairs, and this just made me think of them. But I did show a vehicle like this to one of those two people, and they said it was too small, which I agree with. By American standards, you could probably get one of our power chairs in the back, but not much else. You'd sacrifice all luggage space. But that doesn't change the fact that I honestly think that these little cars are just absolutely. They are neat. They are very cool. They are super popular in Japan. And it's funny, like I told you before, I dub these, this is just my personal name for them, I personally call them the microvan. And with all the convenience and, fuel efficiency of these tiny little cars, you bring it back here to the States, not this particular car, I'm talking about if you were to bring the concept back over to the States. And I do wonder about why SUVs are more popular than minivans. Now, I do think it's primarily an aesthetic thing. I personally think that's a bunch of baloney, because if it were my dollar, I would put practicality above style every time. But what do you guys think of these teeny-weeny little microvans? Do you think that if they were to be adapted for the US market, again, totally, the overall look kept, but overall redesigned to meet US crash standards, that sort of thing, do you think that something like reintroducing the Mazda 5, as it were, you think that would sell or no? Like, I'm just curious, because I really think these are neat. What do you guys think? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.